Julian senses that Edith is hiding something from him, but she refuses to tell him what it is. He promises to wait until she is ready to tell him. Julian gives some of the 19th century newspapers in his sleeping chamber to Dr. Leete. Leete informs Julian that the anarchists who were making such a fuss in the 19th century were actually subsidized by prominent capitalists in order to scare the public into opposing economic and social reform. The reforms that did occur were brought about not by labor or political parties, but by a universal social commitment to the ideal of the brotherhood of man. Women are also members of the industrial army, as they have been freed from the burden of domestic labor. Therefore, women are no longer dependent upon men for their maintenance. They are ranked according to a different system than male workers, and they have their own female general-in-chief, elected in the same manner as the male general-in-chief. She serves in the president's cabinet and has veto power over any measure concerning women's work. Female judges preside over cases that involve only women, but judges of either sex may decide cases involving parties of both sexes. Leete explains that marriage is now based on love rather than wealth. Now that women are free to marry men who make the best fathers, society in general has improved greatly. Moreover, the relations between the sexes are much more frank. A woman can just as easily confess her love for a man as vice versa. One Sunday, Leete invites Julian to listen to a sermon by Mr. Barton transmitted over the telephone wires like music. When Julian hears that he has been the inspiration for the sermon, he is eager to listen. Barton praises the vast improvements made in the conditions of the nation's citizens in only a century. The conditions of the 19th century seem now like unmitigated barbarism. Afterwards, Julian becomes melancholy because he contributed to the inhumane and immoral conditions of the 19th century that Barton so fiercely criticizes. He feels that he inspires revulsion, pity, and curiosity in the people around him as a representative of such an ugly age. Noting his distress, Edith asks Julian to tell her the reason for it. Julian explains that the sermon has dashed his hopes of becoming an equal and integrated member of modern society. Edith assures him that she and her family are sincere in their feelings of friendship for him. Julian confesses his love for Edith, and Edith confesses her love for Julian. Afterwards, Julian learns of her secret. She is the great-granddaughter of Edith Bartlett. Julian has a nightmare that his awakening into the 20th century utopia was all a dream. In the nightmare, he reads a 19th century newspaper, a catalogue of the human misery caused by an economy based on private capital. In the nightmare, he fervently explains to Edith Bartlett's family why their way of life is so horrendous. He tries to explain to them how society can be changed for the better, but they become angry and expel him from their home. Julian is greatly relieved to find that his sudden return to the 19th century was nothing but a nightmare. For a 19th century reading audience, Bellamy's ideas are radical, incredible, almost frightening. Likewise, the anarchist movement was reviled as a serious threat to social order. Bellamy cleverly makes his ideas for social reform more palatable by implying that they are less radical and threatening than those of the anarchist movement. Bellamy only belatedly addresses the role of women in his imagined utopia. He very delicately addresses the narrow roles allotted to women in 19th century society, because the women's rights movement was an extremely controversial issue when he wrote his novel. He ignores the matter of women's rights in favor of pushing for economic reform. Although this may have been a pragmatic move, it is problematic that Bellamy affords so little attention to half of humanity in his portrait of the perfect society.